everyone, this is Bridgette Adu-Wadier from Theogony, and I'm here in the ACPS TV media studio, and here is another episode of Behind the Headlines. With me, I have Denise Dunbar, who works for the Alexandria Times, Emily Leayman from the Alexandria Patch, and Dan Brendel, who works at the Alexandria Gazette packet. And to start off this discussion, we're going to begin with the chaos in Richmond that has been a result of Ralph Northam and the blackface photo that popped up and his refusal to resign, as well as sexual assault accusations of Justin Fairfax. What is the effect of the leadership problems that have been happening, Dan Brendel?
I have to confess to have not done a lot of reporting on this myself, and some of that's deliberate. I choose to stay very, very local. I think sometimes in our public culture, and certainly here in Alexandria, there's a tendency for everything to get sucked up into the stratosphere of national and state level politics. But the business of, living in a city here doesn't stop, and those things are worthy of attention. And so I've chosen to leave coverage of that to the Post and others, and stay focused on local things. I would say though, and I can share my thoughts. I think it's clearly terrible. It undermines the people's trust in the efficacy of government, whether at the state level or here or any level of government. One thing that I do hope it does locally here is kind of make Alexandrians think twice about messianic hopes of a blue wave. Mm-hmm. I think there's a tendency here in Alexandria and probably elsewhere too that as long as you're against Trump and as long as you put the "everybody's welcome here" sign in your lawn, then everything is good, right? But being against the other guy or the other guy's problems doesn't necessarily mean that you've cleaned up your own house.
What did you say again? Local travesties or?
Oh, I said the travesty of your question in Richmond.
Yeah.
I hope that doesn't suck all the oxygen out of the room of local decision making too.
And speaking of local decision making, the leadership problems in Richmond has made it harder for leaders to meet with state officials and everything. And Denise, what do you think the long-term implications of that could be? Because Northern Virginia does need funding to work out Amazon's HQ2 and everything. So
right.
Yeah.
So. Like the Gazette, the Times is very hyper-local. When we cover a state or national issue, it's always about its local impacts. We're not really focused on who did what in Richmond at our paper. I would say that sort of looking further out, there are some interesting political implications for Alexandria. One of them is, as Dan alluded to, the expected blue wave. I think a lot of people thought that the Democrats were going to take over the state legislature in elections this fall. If that doesn't happen, then it has a lot of implications longer term for Alexandria. Whoever controls the state legislature after the census next year will control redistricting. Mm-hmm. So that's a longer term implication that will affect all of us. I also think that if the Democrats were to take over in Richmond, Alexandria's own delegation would have a lot more influence because they're all Democrats and it would be Democrat controlled.
I feel like it's worth noting that Governor Northam and Lieutenant Governor Fairfax really got quite a few votes in Alexandria. It's very heavily blue, and I think the implication for the future is it's really looking ahead to future elections, and I feel like people are going, some Democrats might have lost trust in these people, and I feel like they're going to really look into their candidates and research, do a little more background on that. The campaigns or the opposing campaigns obviously did not do that in the last one, so I feel like people are going to do research and look into that.
This be the end of the blue wave as we know it? A lot of people have lost faith not only in Northam, but as, practically the entire Democratic Party as a whole. What do you think that could mean for Alexandria and Virginia? Do you think, there could be a lot more space for Republicans or other party members to come into leadership?
I don't think there's necessarily an end of a blue wave. I think Alexandria will stay pretty blue, but I feel like the Democrats might have to work a little harder to gain the trust of the people and ensure that they have their interest at heart, especially given that there's a sizable population of African American voters in Alexandria, and I feel like Democratic candidates will have to sort of gain their trust, especially given what just happened with Governor Northam.
Alexandria is bracing itself for the metro shutdown this summer, as the rails are going to be reconstructed in order to address the safety and lack of funding. And as a result, the blue and yellow lines are going to be shut down, along with King Street, Braddock, and Eisenhower Metro. And as a result of this, lots of commuters are going to have to worry about how they're going to get to work. The metro really is a key part of Alexandria's economy. So, Dan, what do you think this means for Alexandria?
Well, the metro is a huge economic driver for the entire region, certainly for Alexandria too. I wrote a story a couple months ago where I learned that 42,000 peak hour riders go to or from or through Alexandria's 4 metro stations. And I didn't believe the people who told me that, so I made them tell me again, but that was what, 42,000 people. Yeah. The transportation department here at the city expects there to be impacts to the city's hotels and other businesses, especially up and down King Street and that corridor. Tourism is a big deal here, so without a doubt that'll be affected. The city is taking, in conjunction with the other regional jurisdictions and WMATA, the Transit Authority, is taking a lot of mitigation efforts. WMATA, last I heard, was expecting that some 60% of riders would divert to shuttles or bus services. Mm-hmm. Alexandria's Dash service, you familiar with that? Yeah. The city's bus service is going to basically surge its fleet. It's going to take older, dirtier diesel buses that it still owns but aren't currently in operation, put them back into operation temporarily to increase capacity. In the long run, there might actually be some benefits because Dash is undergoing a pretty big overhaul. Mm-hmm. It's called the Transit Vision Study or something like that. And just yesterday, in fact, I think it was, Dash had its annual meeting where Mayor Wilson said something to the effect that maybe this surge during the summer would be a good practice, good test bed for whatever they're going to do more long term with the future of Dash. And the stations themselves will be upgraded. Metro is going to upgrade them with other customer amenities, and with the I heard from City Council a couple months ago that they were thinking about, I'm not sure where they're at with this anymore, but if they're going to shut down all those stations for 3 months anyway, what are some large capital projects that the city could piggyback in that time that those stations will be out of service anyway?
Yeah, so speaking of the funding that they're allocating towards this, Metro actually is the only subway system that doesn't have, a dedicated source of funding, through taxes or what.
It does now.
It does?
Yeah.
Oh, it does? Tell me about that, because I didn't know.
Big decision, what, 5 months ago or something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe that was the budget discussions last year.
Yeah, from the state. So they're getting a dedicated revenue source from the state. It was a big deal because they had, WMATA is a political nightmare because it crosses 4 different jurisdictions, the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, and the federal government. And probably it's pretty hard to get 4 different political jurisdictions to agree on anything. Yeah. So other states and other jurisdictions kicked in similar, dedicated funds. This is a really pretty big political victory. The downside too, it's good for Metro. The downside to it was some of that money was just they robbed Peter to pay Paul. They took it out of funding that's allocated through something called the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority that doles out big money for transportation projects. So by funneling that into Metro, they're not funneling it someplace else. So
how can we ensure that the money gets spent as efficiently and effectively as possible, Denise?
So I think one of the concerns that I have is simply that Alexandria has a mandated amount of money that they have to put into this but we have very little say and very little oversight over what happens with it. And WMATA has basically had chronic management problems for years. Unfortunately, these issues are pretty chronic, and I think it's a real concern for taxpayers in the city. I also think that the WMATA projections of ridership are wildly optimistic. I share the skepticism of Mayor Wilson and many members of Alexandria City Council. I think this is going to be a really bad economic hit to Alexandria, following so closely on the heels of the federal government shutdown. And I think that a lot of like a lot of little anecdotal ways that local businesses are really feeling the impact of the government shutdown. I think that this is going to be another one. I'm really not sure who made the decision to shut down all 3 stations at once. I'm not the engineer, but I really don't understand why that couldn't have been sequential, so that we didn't lose all of our metro stops at the same time.
Would they be motivated to put in the extra effort to find a different commuting source? I mean,
well, I mean, they won't have any. If people are not allowed to work from home, they won't have any choice. I mean, personally, I think most people are simply going to wind up driving, but that remains to be seen.
I mean, they could take the bus. That's the hope with a lot of these jurisdictions, that they'll funnel people onto buses and shuttles. A lot of different reasons people don't do that.
Yeah, Alexandria actually did a study recently. They talked about it with City Council, and they're hoping a good portion from a survey said they would use the Metro provided shuttles because they are free. But they are hoping not as many people would drive, but I still think that's going to be traffic.
Yeah,
increased traffic is going to be an issue.
And as for the local businesses, what impact does the metro shutdown have on local businesses, specifically in other industries as well? Tourism, for instance, local businesses, I don't know, Uber in Alexandria.
Yeah, I've heard, I guess like the Tourism Bureau and all of the businesses that are a part of that are pretty concerned about what's going to happen as a result of the metro shutdown. They're actually projecting that there could be hotel revenue decreases in the millions of dollars just from the summer shutdown. And some of the hotels and other businesses are sort of trying to partner together and, with the Potomac Riverboat Company and trying to put together packages where people can get travel to and from Alexandria to DC and stay in hotels and sort of still try to attract people to come here, even though Metro will not be operating. It's worth noting that recently DC hotel revenues have been up quite a bit, which is a little cause for concern for the regional hotels that, like Alexandria, that are sort of banking on getting business and having people stay in the suburbs and when they're traveling to DC. So
yeah, and Justin Wilson did mention that. He said that the
Yes.
council was skeptical, and he said, according to Washington Top News, he said that this is a fragile business environment we're already in. This will put businesses out of businesses, and yeah, like the long-term impact of this economy is, something worth talking about.
Well, it is, and I also think that it can reverberate in areas that aren't immediately obvious. For instance, earlier this year, the city of Alexandria passed a 1-cent increase in the tax on restaurant meals in the city. So if the number of people dining out in this city decrease by enough, not only is it going to impact the tax revenues that the local government has, which would probably mean a larger than normal increase in the tax rate, but it's going to be less money raised for affordable housing. You don't really immediately think, oh, the metro shutdown is going to negatively impact the ability to provide more affordable housing for lower income people in our city, but it actually is going to affect that.
I would note, I agree with Denise that they are a mess. They do need to be fixed.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
concrete falling off of them, and I live near the Braddock Road Metro, and I know the platform and the train don't align, so that's that's a problem for people with wheelchairs and things like that. It's got to be fixed. The metro stations here are a good example of what they call deferred maintenance. That's a common phrase you'll hear
deferred maintenance.
in any politics of any at any level. But it's with everything. It's going on with the schools, it's going on with city infrastructure, it's going on with the metro, it's going on with
Do you have any
Everything.
idea?
People don't want to pay taxes to fix stuff, and then it gets kicked down the road, and then becomes a crisis.
Dear. That's all that we have for this episode. I want to thank Dan Brendel, Denise Dunbar, and Emily Leayman for coming here, as well as the TCTV media staff. And I'm Bridgette Adu-Wadier, and this is Behind the Headlines. Thank you for watching. If you have any suggestions, please email tctitantv@gmail.com.